from leadership and personal growth to marriage, fatherhood, and balancing career and family. Join us as we explore insightful conversations and practical advice to help you thrive as a man after God's own heart.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Men After God podcast. So thankful for Luke stepping in last week. It was great to have a conversation with Adrian the week before, but man, I missed you, Luke.
I know,
I'm so
right?
glad to be talking. I feel like I haven't talked to you forever. You've been traveling the world without me. It's been depressing. You know, he went to sunny Florida and now back in Texas.
Yeah, it is. I tell you what, after doing the podcast by myself last week, I can tell you that I have a voice that needs Dustin in the same podcast. It was just like, man, there was no laughter and celebration. Laughing at my own jokes doesn't work. So, man, we need to give you a raise, Dustin. Just want to throw it out there.
Yeah,
so
there you go. That's it, man. Well, listen, I will always give you courtesy laughs. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's why we pay him the big bucks, guys.
That's it. So listen, guys, today we're going to, I think we can kind of wrap up our seasons discussion today, but we're wrapping it up in a way that we're going to address any season you're in or have been in, will be in, with a cliche phrase. But before we get to that phrase, I want to share some cliche phrases I've heard over the years, and appropriate cliche phrases I've heard over the years, because I've heard plenty that were not, between being in the South and in the Marine Corps. It just is what it is. But one of the ones that I thought would be good to share, and maybe you've heard, is that we can be busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. And honestly, I think we've all been there before. And now that I've kind of brought this back into my mind, I'm hoping you guys are thinking like I am, and you're honestly like have the idea of like, you know what, I wonder, like, what does that look like? And I'm sure we can get an AI video of that. That's what we should do. Go to ChatGPT and Sora, get a video of what does it look like for a one-legged man to be busy in a butt-kicking contest. And now I have something to go do when we get off this podcast.
Can you imagine? So, you know, the literal aspect of AI and how it takes things. I'm just waiting to see what in the world it thinks of that. You know, I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
we'll add that to our show notes, guys.
Yeah, I'm not looking at show notes. I'm going to Sora right now. We're going to see what happens. But while we do that, these cliche phrases, they come around from a lot of different places. But there's a very important one that I think we need to dive into as it pertains to the seasons of life that you can be in. Luke mentioned before the seasons that we're going through right now, and just it's different for us. And But it's a season of what are we going to do while we're here in this? So the phrase that we're going to talk about today is to bloom where you are planted. Now, Luke, have you ever had someone say that phrase or another cliche phrase to you, and you appreciated it, but you didn't want to hear it at the time?
Yes, there's so many, and we'll not get into any of them today. But specifically that one, I heard that when I was a teenager. And it was actually another teenage young lady in our youth group that was sharing a testimony, and somebody had told that to her to kind of just like, because she was off making her plans for the future. And when she shared that with our youth group, it was like, hey, I was challenged to bloom where I'm planted. And I was like, wow, that's good stuff right there. And when you're not, and I'll say this from the place where I was at, because I was not in a place where I was like, man, I don't want to be here or whatever. It was like, oh, that's great. That's great stuff. I'm going to bloom where I'm planted. Well, then as I've gone forward in life, and there's been places where I'm at where I'm like, Lord, I don't really want to be here. Like, this isn't where I want to grow. Then that phrase, like, it hits you. So it's like, oh, you're just going to bloom where you're planted. Well, like, but what? I don't want to bloom. I don't want to be planted. Like, I just don't want to, like, so I think it's a great conversation today. So,
yeah, man. Well, I nerd out on this stuff. We were talking before we hit record about like, where did this phrase come from? And it's attributed back to a guy, St. Francis of Versailles. I think was it Versailles? Maybe St. Francis de Sales. It's spelled sales, but I think it's pronounced "sai" because it's French. But and even his phrase isn't exactly what this is, but it's been around since the 16th century. And then some of you that are listening, depending upon your age, may know it from a guy named Paul Harvey. He had a radio broadcast for many years.
The rest of the story.
And apparently, he would say it quite often. But to bloom where you're planted. So, guys. Is it a biblical phrase? No. Is it a biblical concept? Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to talk to you about one of the worst places you could hear this. and have to abide by it. And that is in captivity of your enemy. Can you imagine what it was like for the Israelites taken to Babylon and being told, hey, get comfy. Hey, you're going to spend time here, and you're going to have to. We talked about in the patriotism versus Christian nationalist podcast that God told them to go there and like, hey, do well for the country because you're going to be part of it for a while, right? Can you imagine? You don't want to be there, and sometimes we can be in a season where we feel like we are in the captivity of our enemy, but we need to bloom where we're planted. And it's why? Well, because we do all things to the glory of God. In Babylon, they were told to build houses. They planted gardens. They were raising families. But I can tell you, they didn't want to be in Babylon. But God said, don't waste your time in Babylon. Do well while you're there. Bring me glory. Represent, if you will, right? Now, Luke, your perspective on it, I love you brought up Psalm 1, and I think it was 1. Talk about that and how it applies to this.
You know, when Dustin's when he texted me earlier because we're getting ready to schedule this, he's like, hey, I think we're going this direction. I love it because Dustin likes to have everything scheduled and bracketed and like structured. And this was a raw concept. Like, he's like, hey, I think we're going this direction. This is because like I mentioned last week, the season that we're each in a unique season. And by the way, I've got no issues with the season. I mean, I'm very, very, like, to be honest, to be transparent, I should say, my 4 kids are in Oregon having a great time with grandparents, with Alicia's parents. And it's just Monica and I kind of celebrating the summer together. And it's just like this great party. I don't got to worry about feeding the kids. Make sure, like, I feel it's such a great season. Now, for those of you that thinking like, wow, I could really handle that season in my life right now. If I could get a break from these kids, it'd be great. This is the season we're in. But when he texted me, my first thought was planted. Like, where do we see in the Bible where, yes, the phrase bloom where you're planted is not word for word in the Bible. But if we go to Psalm chapter 1, it talks about, the blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of men God. It kind of defines this individual, but then it says this, he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bringeth forth fruit in his season. His leaf also does not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. And I just want to, the concept there is like, hey, there are times when you're planted, and I just want the concept of God's going to plant you if you're faithful in doing what you should. You're walking in the way. You're following after what God. He's going to put you in places. And by the way, he might plant you by the river of life, but you're the river of water or whatever the case. But you don't see it as a place that you want to be planted. And so the understanding is like, hey, God's going to plant you. God's going to place you, and you need to steward where you're at. Because there's so much more in regards to, we're talking about the planting, the seasons, the fruit. You're going to bear fruit in your season when you're planted where you're supposed to be planted. But it doesn't mean you're going to bear fruit right away. It doesn't mean that you choose how much fruit, and it doesn't mean you really want to. But the thing is, it's the privilege of the fact that we do get guided by God and get to put our roots down in places where maybe it doesn't make sense to us, but it makes sense to God, and God's going to bless us there. And the opportunity to blossom is to prepare to bear fruit. So as you're looking like, hey, I'm going to bloom where I'm planted. The bloom is the start of the production of fruit. And we talk about, like, what does that fruit look like? Well, it probably isn't always what you think it should look like. You talk about, like, bearing the fruit of patience. Well, what does the fruit of patience look like, Dustin?
Oh, no. You can't ask me that one. I'm still learning that one. I can't tell you.
Well, I'll say this. If you've ever prayed and asked God for patience, I guarantee he gave you opportunity to.
Your children became very extra that day.
Yes,
your wife decided to give you the honeydew list that day.
Oh, man.
At the same time,
it's just the understanding. It's like, I've met individuals who, and I'm not really talking about the individual who's walked away from God and now you need to come to where God wants you to be spiritually, mentally, and even physically. There's a conversation there that you need to have with God. But to the individual where you are not where you want to be, you are in a season of waiting, you are in a season of nothing is happening, nothing is moving. Well, maybe God has taken you to put your roots down, and you literally have to steward that. And the concept of, like, hey, if you're in a dark place, well, maybe you've been planted and it's time to grow.
That's good. There's probably, I don't know if there's an allegorical illustration we can come up with, like with planting or anything of that nature, but um, there is the saying that there's always the darkness before it's the darkest before the dawn. And when you're planted in a place, a situation that you don't want to be in, making the choice to bloom, to move forward, to start growing where you're at. It starts with accepting that you're there. And it's probably not accepting, I'm sorry, it's accepting that you're there, but it's not, you're not going to be happy about it. If you have to have this phrase said to you, or if you're reminded of yourself, you're probably not, in a situation where your kids are away with the grandparents for 4 weeks and you and your wife are just having the time of your life, right? Like, you're probably like it when you hear that, like, I'm blooming exactly where I'm planted and I'm happy about it. Yes, it's wonderful, right? But when you're in a situation to where a change of job or a change of lifestyle due to monetary reasons or health issues or children gone away from the Lord or children gone away from family, whatever it might be, that's where this phrase and this principle comes in place. So accepting that you're in this position is the beginning of blooming, because until you accept that you're actually planted, you're just going to keep fighting against it. But once you accept that, then you could begin the growth process. And the growth process, man, I wish you, because again, you said it, I like things structured and formula, and like I'm going to be teaching math this year. And so, yeah, I mean,
control. It's called control, guys.
It's called stewardship, Luke. Anyways.
But that was a good word play. We'll give it to you that way.
Yeah, I know, right? We got to spiritualize it, right? Yeah, but no,
yes.
It's control. I like the control, and I like to know, like, okay, if I do this, this will be the outcome, right?
Right.
But what I'm learning, and this is one of those things, like I say, I'm learning. I've known, I've said, but now I'm learning, and I'm hoping some of you guys will relate to that. Is that accepting where I'm at doesn't mean, okay, let me get the formula for how I'm going to get out of this. It means just moving forward with the next thing I have in front of me, because at this point, I don't know what the future actually holds. I can't give you a 10-year plan. I can't, but what I can do right now, I can do the next right thing today.
Right.
And for a guy like myself, who's been described as visionary, ambitious, driven, and all these other words that sound so cool and amazing, at least to me anyway, but they can be really great in a good context. But when you're in a place and God's trying to grow you, men, let me tell you, the drive and ambition will be your greatest enemy rather than your greatest friend. Because rather than being fruitful in the season, as Luke said it, you've got to bloom before you bear fruit. It's about being faithful.
Yes.
And just because, I'm going to toss it back to Luke with this one, just because you're planted somewhere now doesn't mean you'll be planted there forever. There's a difference between being stuck and stagnant and being planted. Luke, what does it look like to be stagnant at a place, and then go into the positive side of what does it look like to be blooming, growing in a place?
Yeah, so much there. I think that if you've ever, I grew up in the Northwest, and there's a lot more. Like, I'm in Texas now, and there's plants and trees that grow. But up in the Northwest, there are tree farms. There are Christmas tree farms. There's a replant effort where you can get tax breaks for replanting your property with trees. And there are times, to be honest, like there's a thinning out, and there's all sorts of biblical illustrations of making space for people to grow, or as I say, for trees to grow. So I grew up working on with a logger who did a lot of replant after he logged, and we learned how to kind of clear out the thicket for the trees. But there were times where a tree would be in a place where it would either get stifled, just like the illustration of the sowing and reaping, where the sower goes out to sow seeds and shallow ground or hard ground. But there would be times where the trees would die and they would not be able to grow, or they wouldn't be able to grow in a healthy manner. And eventually what would happen is that would be one of the trees that would be eliminated out of the thicket, so that the other trees would have space to grow, because that tree was fighting, if you would, where it was still growing, it was still alive, but it was stagnant. It wasn't going up. and a lot of times the tree would grow in maybe a different angle than it was supposed to, and we try to prop it up and make sure it was going straight up like it's supposed to. But eventually, if that tree did too much of a curve, and eventually that tree was cut out and thrown in the fire, because it was useless, and it actually would pull from the ground. In that, so there's a concept of like there's a stagnant people that are stuck. They're not growing. I want you to think about this spiritually. You look at, like even Paul talked about, like people that are taking communion and they're taking it kind of like just whatever. They're dead, and he's not talking about physically dead. He's talking about spiritually dead Christians who are doing the sacraments or doing the communion. They're doing the things, but they're living in a place where they're not living in the life that God has for them. And I know that there's times when I would say there's times when it's hard to see the difference, and there are times when only you know the difference, meaning that we look at Job and his friends. Job was in a place of tremendous trial and tension and all the stuff. Growing where he was planted was the last thing he wanted to do. In fact, he wanted to be thrown in a hole so God couldn't see him and would stop picking on him, right?
Yeah.
But Job knew he had done nothing wrong, but his friends didn't, and his wife didn't. It was obviously the judgment of God on him. So when we're looking at this understanding where you know whether you are spiritually dead because you're regarding iniquity in your heart, you're holding some things that you shouldn't be holding on to. You're hiding some things you shouldn't be hiding, that you need to surrender and maybe confess to God. There's a confession health, if you would. But most of the time, you're the one who knows that. It's not a public sin. Now, it can be made public later on, but in the process of growing and developing, understand this: the bloom where you planted, people that are planted in Christ bloom. And I want you to understand this. This is not my logic illustration. I heard this recently. I thought it was really great. Think about a seed when it's planted, a tree when it's planted, something is planted. Before that seed can even bloom, before it can go through the ground, what happens first? What happens before the tree goes up? It goes down. A tree, technically, if you take the root system of most trees and pulled it out and pulled it, looked at the top and the bottom, technically you'd see the same thing, just one's above the ground with leaves and the other's below the ground. And the older the tree is, the more of a root system it has. And even if the tree doesn't have a lot on top during seasons of not blooming, it's always going down because the source is there. But I want you to understand this. It is the tension of when you are spiritually in a dark place, in which you are planting your roots and you're growing down, you're growing and you're pushing against the tension below you, that allows you to show up above the surface. Oftentimes we want to show up above the surface because, well, I want to show what God's doing and show all this stuff. And God's like, no. You're going to go down roots deep into me and my source of strength, energy, and everything that you need to survive before we ever see the fruit above. So the bloom where you're planted concept, it's beautiful. But what's beautiful is understanding that when you see the blossom of somebody else who's spiritually producing fruit, what you did not see and what you don't see is a root system that is strong in the Lord, and has been through some tension and fought around some rocks and moved through some spaces that were dark and tight. But in the process of it, we see the blossom and we're like, oh, that's a beautiful fruit tree. But what's below the surface is a beautiful spiritual walk that is sourced in the nutrients of the Lord and what he has for us.
Absolutely. And that can't happen if we do what so many can commonly do. And you alluded to it with Job, of blaming God for where we are. And, a conversation around the sovereignty of God is not one we're going to get into tonight. However, there's different schools of thought as to what the sovereignty of God means. And one of them is that God is moving every chess piece on the board, if you will, to exactly align everything that's happening in our lives. The other one, I think, can be best described as God created the chessboard, God created the chess pieces and the rules for their movement, but yet how the game is played, if you will, is more so in our hands. If we are believing God has put us in a situation, it's not that he couldn't have, it's not that he didn't allow it, but if we believe he put us in a situation or has us in one for anything other than our growth to glorify him, we see it as punishment for sin or for something of that nature. Now there are natural consequences for sin and ignorance. There's a great phrase out there: life's hard, it's even harder when you're stupid. Um, like there's another one about the things that you do is all the problems you have is because the stupid people in the world and you're one of the stupid people, things like that. Like some of it's your own fault. Like quit blaming God for your own stupidity. But what I'm getting at with this is the season you're in, the time of life that you're in, whatever it is you're going through. If you don't accept that you are there, that God is good, he still loves you regardless of how comfortable or how good things are going around you, you're not going to be able to grow that foundation, those foundational roots deeper into who Jesus is and who God
Yeah.
is and what he has for you. You'll continually what was the phrase that Jesus used with Paul? You'll continue to kick against the pricks, if you will.
Right. Right.
You'll always be pushing against the one who's trying to really hold you and nourish you through that season, so that he can do what George Feeney did in Boy Meets World. And yes, we went there. And guys, y'all pray for Luke. I asked him about this. He's not seen Boy Meets World. And now that it's
Not yet.
known, he not yet, exactly. I told him, I was like, listen, you got no kids, you gotta like go binge this. Let the kids watch the first few seasons. Teenager may love all of them, but it gets they like the first. I'm going to get on a rabbit trail with that. Nonetheless, let's get back to this. George Feeney. I'm sure many of you know who he is. If you don't, go just go watch Boy Meets World. But George Feeney was the principal there. He's the neighbor of Corey, the main character. Corey gave him a plant when he was younger, and he comes to him when he's, I think, going to a different college. Or going to college, and he's talking to him, and Feeney says, "Oh, hey, did you see that plant in my garden there?" And he says, "I had it in my house in a little small flower pot, but it began to outgrow the flower pot. But when I went to move it, it resisted, and I had to really use some strength to pull it out of there. It didn't want to come, and I pulled it out, and then I've transplanted it into this garden now." To where it can get the sunlight and it can grow and it can and be more full of a plant and a more beautiful plant. But had it never got transplanted, it would never been able to grow. Most of us don't want to enter into the seasons that are going to help us grow into who God has made us to be, because it's not comfortable. It's not where we want to be. It's going to be different. It's going to be hard, but it is possible. And until we accept that, yes, God, I will say it at most allowed it to happen, and that doesn't change the fact that he is good and he is with us through things, and he has something on the other side of it. And this isn't a health, wealth, prosperity thing, but this is saying that God can and will use you in the difficulty, through the difficulty, and on the other side of it. And so being a tree planted by a stream of water will bear fruit. But I want to challenge you to say that maybe you're not planted by the stream right now, but God's getting ready to move you there. Now, I know the biblical illustration is different than what I just mentioned, so don't come at me with that, guys. You got what I'm saying. But
You know your
just
audience
know,
way too well.
I know, right? So, but understand that just because you don't like where you're at right now doesn't mean it's where you'll be forever. Being stuck is being stagnant. Being in the same place financially, being in the same place spiritually, and choosing not to grow, that can be stagnation. But choosing to grow, choosing to pursue the Lord, choosing to let those roots grow deep, choosing to be in the difficulty, that's where God will meet you. There's a great book out there, Deeper by Dane Ortland. Everybody knows him for Gentle and Lowly, and it's a fantastic book, but read Deeper. And I think it's chapter one, if not chapter one, chapter two. Chapter title is just Jesus. And he talks, or I think it's that chapter. He talks about how it's in our weakness that we are closer to God than when we are in our strength.
Yeah.
And we've got to accept that we're weak and in a weak position before we can grow close to God to get out of it. And that's the tension we face. We've got to battle that tension in our own hearts that we can't do it ourselves. And instead of letting that be your last resort of God, I've done everything, now I need you, let it be your first choice. Luke, I'm going to toss it back to you on that one.
Yeah, I think that, I think the word faithfulness you're talking about, like, you want the fruit, but it starts with being faithful, is crucial in times of in times of growth, and talk about like there's no scenario in our world that we know where growth is not painful. As a
Mm.
young child, growing pains are a common conversation. As a child's bones are developing, as they're getting taller, it's actually physically painful. As an animal grows, as a plant grows, there's a fight for survival. And I'm not talking about the song. It is a day-to-day kind of process. And we get so used to just like, well, everybody else is growing. I want you to think about like if I planted an acorn tree and a moso bamboo tree next to each other, the maple tree or the acorn tree would grow. And you'd see that within a few weeks, you'd see this plant grow and you'd see it keep on growing. And for a very long time, the bamboo would actually never sprout. In fact, it would be 4 to 5 years of growth of that maple tree where you'd see the maple tree grow and blossom and be 30, 40 feet tall, potentially in 5 years. And you wouldn't even see the bamboo tree start to come through the ground. And yet at that 4 to 5 year mark, suddenly it just starts to come out of the ground, and within 4 to 6 weeks or 5 to 6 weeks, it'll be growing about a meter a day until it's 90 feet tall,
Mm.
because that was its seasonal effect of how that tree blooms. And so many times we're looking at those around us saying, well, why isn't it my turn to grow that way? Why do I have to grow down into roots? Why? Well, just be mindful. God is the one that brings the fruit. We do what we're supposed to do when you surrender the outcome. And when you're surrendering the outcome, there is a peace, there is a health, there is a God's got me right where he wants me. So for many of you, and by the way, I've had conversations with some of you that are listening where like, man, but why, God? I don't understand. And by the way,
Mm.
I don't got any answers. I can just say, but it is God.
Yeah.
Because whether you're being tempted, which is not of God, if you're like, I'm being tempted, what's God's doing? Well, he's not tempting you. He might be a part of your testing and your growth. And he might be allowing the tempting, but it's not God that tempts you. So just be mindful as you're developing. You're like, man, why am I struggling with everything I'm struggling? Well, just potentially God's trying to see what you can grow through in the process of what you're going through. The
Mm.
privilege of tension is going to be growth, but the growth is always something that you have to be very mindful. It's never easy. You're never going to find growth in a comfort zone.
No.
But I will
Look at,
say that,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Now I will say that in seasons, there'll be seasons where you're like, wow, hindsight, I can look back and say, wow, look what God's done. That wasn't me. That's all God. And people can see that because of your response in your season of growth or growing pains.
You got biblical examples of this. You look at Moses in the desert, becoming who God needed him to be there. Jesus himself was in Nazareth for 30 years before his public ministry. I mean, look at that. That's a great example of what you were talking about earlier. And you know, this is Jesus, so I understand it's a little different, but it wasn't as though at 12, 14 years old, when he was more than capable as the Son of God to have went out and started his public ministry, he spent 30 years for a 3.5 year ministry.
Yeah.
Paul spent his time training before he went church planting. And then one concept I love that stood out to me that my pastor said the other night when he was teaching about Paul was how he was in full-time ministry, and then he leaves full-time ministry and gets into tent making and
Yeah.
spends time doing that, and then gets back into it. So that goes back to the season you're in isn't the season you're going to be in forever. I love this phrase I've heard before. I don't know where from, but it's that God uses seasons of obscurity to develop spiritual maturity.
Yeah.
And it's in those times that we can just really cling to him. But now, Luke, as we begin to wind down, this is the principle. I'm going to bring up the piece for me that is so difficult. I'm going to start the conversation with saying it deals with contentment, right? Paul wrote and said, I have found that whatsoever state I am, therefore I am content. And he's writing from Roman prisons. He's going through all these difficulties and these things. And I tell myself, and look, I don't know if you relate to this, maybe, but I know I tell myself, like, if I'm in a situation like prison where I have no choice but to look, this is it. I got nothing. I'm in Babylon for 70. I can't, nothing I can do here. Okay. I've got to be here and do this. Then I think in my mind, while not easier to be like, all right, well, I'm here. For me, getting to that place, I have to go through the struggle of saying, but I can do something that will change my situation and make it better and make it something I want to be in. And I can then try to force a transplant, if you will, to a different season. I can try to force something to happen when God's saying, no, you don't get to do that. You get to stay and I get to grow you. But when in reality, I see it in my head with all the logic and the formula and plans I can make of, okay, yeah, this is great. But if I do this, and this, I won't be in this situation anymore. And so, guys, I don't know if you're like me, and Luke, I don't know if you think like that, but it's almost as it's harder for me to choose contentment when I can do something about my discontentment rather than choosing contentment, waiting for God to do something about the situation that's leading to my discontentment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say that to those of you that are listening, most of you connected with that. You related with that. Like, hey, I've been in a state of, I didn't want to be there. It wasn't right. I didn't see this as my future. And I chose to do something. And by the way, I'd say the Bible says whatsoever is not of faith is sin. And oftentimes we're so quick to jump from faith to fact, from faith to what I can control to I'm going to make the decision and really hope that God's on board, because if he's not, he's going to miss out. And it's just like, and I just cannot imagine. It's years ago, and it is true. It's years ago. I found something as a little kid. I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, maybe. I found this thing at a store, local store, and it was called Bird Deals. I don't know why it was called, but I think it was Bird Deals. I don't remember the name of it. It was just random place, but it had like a bunch of junk in it. It had all this cool stuff,
Okay.
and it was all like stuff that was new but not fancy, right? And I found this this pirate. It was not a pirate thing. I found this telescope, like the pirate kind, the binoculars, the one I forget what it's called. I can't remember the name of it. Right?
It's called a monocular, right?
Yeah, because it's not. But yeah, it's exactly. And I found this, and it was like this little version, and they had a bunch of them there, and they were like $12. I'm like, that would go well with all of our pirate stuff at home and our treasures, and I'd be the coolest kid on the block. By the way, we were the only kids on the block because my brothers and sisters. I'm like,
yeah, but there were like 12 of you, so you still had,
Yeah.
there was a pecking order, and so,
yes, and so I was convinced I was going to go buy it. I saved my money, and I begged and borrowed and steal, and I did a bunch of stuff to get my money for this, right? Because we bought our own toys, and my parents wouldn't buy it for me. Now, here's the thing: I fought for it. Was like, hey, I got the money together. We had gone on a road trip. We were coming back. I'm like, Dad, please take me there. He's like, no, Luke, you can't go there tonight. And I was like, please. And so we went there, right? And couldn't find them. And then I found one broken one. There was one left. It was kind of broken, falling apart, but I'm like, I'll take it. It's better than nothing, right? It literally did not work, but it was kind of looked like it. So I'll still be the coolest kid on the block. They'll be jealous, right? Well, the thing is that it was right next to my birthday, and my brother Micah was trying to he knew how much I wanted it. So he'd gone and purchased it and knew exactly what I was going to do. And there were only 3 left. And he purchased the last 3 of them to make sure that I couldn't purchase it on my own. And I found a broken one.
oh,
And I'll say this, he was so disappointed because he wanted to be the one to give me this thing that I wanted so bad. And I say that in seasons of you're trying to make things happen and control it. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin, was not a suggestion, it's a fact. So when you're so trying to make everything by sight and logical, and for me, I'm no less guilty than Dustin when he said, like, I have the power to change my state. And God's like, but I put you there to bring you something better, which was me, deep, Jesus, depth. And so ultimately I got this spyglass only to find out that it was broken. And I was so excited about something broken, and my brother was going to be giving me something that was really not broken. It was great. And then in turn, he's like, well, it's for your birthday. You can have it now, but you kind of spoiled it. And sometimes we're so busy getting what we want that we spoil it. And we spoil what God wants to do in our life. We spoil the fact that I didn't have to go get a bunch of money and do a bunch of side chores to do this. I just had to wait I just had to just not go do what I thought was right. In seasons of growth, in seasons of I'm going to bloom where I'm planted, we're so often trying to move. Well, I'd say this, there's aspects you need to make some decisions in, but most of the time you need to wait on the Lord, which means you're going to intertwine with him and walk with him and let him replant you. And by the way, don't get too comfortable, because most likely the odds are high he's going to uproot you and move you right to a better place. And you're going to hate that part too. And you're like, all right, hey, I promise God's plan is perfect. The process really can be dark sometimes, but the outcome is you and him. Irrelevant of the place, you and him is what matters.
I love it. I want to get real practical before we depart, Luke. Let's talk about it. Guys, when you're in those seasons, you're in those times, the question is, well, what do I do? Well, first pursue Jesus. Be in your Bible, be in prayer, go after the Lord. Maybe you don't need to sit in a chair and pray and read your Bible. Maybe you need to go for a nature walk, go for a run, go to the gym, get close to God. Whatever that looks like to you, get close to the Lord, okay? Engage where you're at. Love your wife. Be present with your kids. They need their father. They need their husband. Cultivate the relationships with those that are around you. Invest in relationships with men who can guide you, direct you. Connect with guys online if you want. Our Men After God Network, we'd love to talk to you in there. You can always reach out to us. Do the things that you're doing as best as you could possibly do them. Colossians 3:23, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord. Notice there's not a caveat on there like if you're happy about it. Like, that's what we're trying to get our kids to learn, right? Like, hey, go mow the lawn.
You know it, do your best. No. Do your best. Yeah. Okay.
That's
okay.
it. No, talking to my kids to go mow the lawn. Like, hey, I want you to go mow. I don't want to mow the lawn. I didn't ask if you wanted to. My 9-year-old who wanted to mow since he was like 6, finally got the opportunity to learn to mow. Now hates mowing, and he is still learning how to mow well. He's not mowing well because he hates doing it. Now, whether we hate doing it or not, we do it well as unto the Lord. And even if the new job, a different job, maybe it's a new place you're in, new church you're attending, new situation of life because of health or finances or family, whatever it might be, has got you in. It may not be one you're happy about, but it doesn't mean you can't serve the Lord with gladness in your heart in that season. And then know the difference between discomfort and a call. Seek the Lord for not to make you comfortable, but to call you somewhere else. I was talking to a friend as I'm going through my own season, and he's coming out of his, the best way to describe it, but someone gave him some counsel in a couple different ways. And one of them was, as he was trying to leave, he was asked, well, what's God calling you to? Because I don't know. I could put some stuff out there. I could just figure it out. And this person said to him, have you ever seen God work that way? Or is he just going to work that way for you? Like, we didn't need that now. Okay. That's unnecessary.
Low, hurtful, blow. Yeah.
yeah. But true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then someone else gave him counsel and said, sometimes the uncomfortable thing is not leaving, but the uncomfortable thing is staying.
Yeah.
And that is hard, I think, for some of us to imagine, that the uncomfortable growth doesn't come from something different. It comes from staying. Yeah. And so while you're there, pray for peace. Pray for God to bring that peace in your heart, the Holy Spirit to work, for you to find joy. And that's going to come from a daily pursuit of him and whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah.
So guys, it could have been more raw and personal. I know I could have shared a lot of stories, but we make our podcast. We share stories about us so you can relate, but what we share is for you, about you. And so God can grow you where you are into who he wants you to be. I want to say thanks so much to Luke. I'm so glad to have you back, man. Now we've got to schedule another recording.
Yes.
And then one thing for you guys, we're in July right now. In August, be sure to check out Men of Valor Ministries. We'll put a link in our show notes. They've got a great conference going on in North Carolina. We're going to have a representative there. He's going to be teaching a breakout session. We'll have some of our merch available. I can't make it this year, but we're thankful for Adrian, actually, who I podcasted with a couple weeks ago. He's going to be there. It's going to be a great time. And don't forget, if you know anyone who is looking to develop, revitalize, or grow their men's ministry in the church, we offer a coaching program where we'd love to work with them on that. Luke, final thought, man. One final thought. I know you got something good.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. I was listening to you talk about like praying for the peace aspect of it. I think many times in our seasons of growth, in just the darker moments, we're not where we want to be. We're looking for like, okay, let me check some boxes so I can move out. Like, I know God's working. I haven't done anything wrong. So let me just check these boxes so that I can move forward out of it real quick. As you're praying for peace, just let God do the work. The work most likely is not a box you check. It's a heart change. And when you find heart change, there's one or two things going to happen. Either God's going to move you because he's ready to move you, or you're going to be moved to know like, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm gonna grow through what I'm going through. I'm gonna bloom where I'm planted, because I'm gonna do whatever I'm going through. I'm gonna do it for the glory of God, and I'm gonna lift him up in these moments. And a lot of times, that's all the change we need, is just a change of perspective, not a change of place.
That's good. Awesome, brother. Well, hey guys, listen, it's been another great episode. If it's brought some value to your life, I hope you'll share it with a friend and let them know the Men After God podcast is here for them and for you as you continue to grow into the man God's made you to be. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Men After God podcast. We hope today's discussion has encouraged and equipped you on your journey. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, or would like to partner with us, please reach out at support@menaftergod.net. Stay connected with our community by liking our Facebook page at facebook.com/menaftergodpodcast. For deeper engagement, join our group at facebook.com/groups/menaftergod and connect with other men pursuing God's heart. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more men striving to live faithfully. Until next time, stay strong in the faith and continue pursuing after God.